Rob Henderson. I'm really pleased to. I know that sound. That's what we all got, right? For the last 3 years. I don't usually get it live anymore, but now it is. So I come from Ottawa. I'm from BioTalent Canada. So those of you who may not know BioTalent Canada, we're partners with organizations like AgWest Bio out here, organizations across the prairies. I just came from Winnipeg, where I was meeting with the Bioscience Association of Manitoba, and I went out to Banff for biomedical engineering. And this is the last leg of my Western tour, which was been quite pleasant indeed. So BioTalent Canada, we're a national not-for-profit. So we cover all of Canada. And one of the things that as a national not-for-profit, we do labor market analysis across the country for the bioeconomy. So that means we do censuses, we do research projects, and we find skills gaps. In other words, where is the bioeconomy missing skills, packets of skills? And it's a little challenging. Do you have that clicker there? Where did you put it? It's over here. Thank you. It's just the forward button there. Okay, there we go. And it's a little challenging over in Canada because there's sort of two things that we have to consider. One is that we take an inclusive definition of the bioeconomy, which means we're not only talking about the ag sector, we also cover the life sciences, which is sort of the gorilla in the room when you're talking about biosciences, because they employ about 60% of all of the people in STEM or in biosciences across Canada. But we also cover the bioenergy sector and the bioindustrial sector. So you've got a lot of skills here, like when you're talking about biomanufacturing or something. Well, it's markedly different if you're talking about life sciences, biomanufacturing, than if you're talking in the bioindustrial or the ag sector. So it's difficult to find those skills gaps and limit it to a sector. But also, as we know, it's a big country. So each region is very, very different as well. And I came today with some numbers about the prairies, a little bit about the ag bio sector to let you know, to show you a little bit about what those skills deficits, how do they compare with what we found across the country? What are some of the unique challenges that we're going to be finding out here in this sector in terms of finding talent? And how do we address them? And I've got a couple of little commercial slides of some of the programs that we are working with in terms of trying to find you folks the talent that you require. So one of the things we do at BioTalent Canada is we try to walk the talk. So we've won a few awards as an employer ourselves. We have a team of about 45 to 50 people. And this year we were pleased to be named Canada's 20th best place to work for employees under 50. For under 50 employees. We think that's important because if I'm going to be talking to you about best practices, I need to implement them. There should be some credibility in terms of the HR that I'm talking about and some of the best practices that we go. And these things are important. I mean, they're just little emblems that we put on there. But I got to tell you, when you take HR seriously, candidates take notice of this stuff. And they do take a look, and it has driven some very good qualified candidates and driven our retention levels as well. So if there's opportunities, and maybe I can convince AgWest Bio to institute a top employer award for Saskatchewan. These are great things to consider because it's a way you can stand out. So a little bit about BioTalent Canada. We are an independent national organization, not-for-profit. We work on a project basis, sometimes with the federal government, but we are independent. What we've done over the last several years is we've created a partnership program of which to organizations like AgWest Bio and GIFTS are proud members. And we have about 80 partners across the country. A lot of them are industry associations, as you can see. Many of them are some of the fastest growing biotech companies in Canada. Some of them are suppliers like lawyers, law firms, as well as headhunting firms and recruiters. Many of them are academic institutions. As you can see, we have about 24 of them across country. They work with us because they're the suppliers of the talent. And they're working with us to try to make sure that they are getting them upskilled as much as they can so that they can get into valuable jobs. And then up at the top here, you see showcase employers. These are some of the fastest growing companies across Canada, those that have made HR a priority for themselves. So they come to us so we can brand them with our products and services, and so that they can also talk to us about some of the best practices that we can help them implement. So last month, we launched a national talent strategy. This is the culmination of a bunch of work of labor market intelligence. We did the largest sweeping study of biotech employers across Canada. We released the results earlier last year. That's some of the stuff I'll be talking about in a minute. But we lent itself into a national talent strategy. And in other words, how can we help companies equip themselves with the best talent available? Because we're working in a scientific industry, we start with science. So the first thing we have to do is measure. And that's what we did with our labor market intelligence. So we're finding out where the skills gaps are, because that shows you from a scientific methodology what you need to do and where you need to apply pressure. The second thing we did was, as part of this wheel, is we developed national occupational standards. Why is that important? National occupational standards are important so that you have a map that if you're looking for a clinical research associate, or if you're looking for a business development manager, you see the kinds of skills that are common to these roles across the country. And all of these have been validated. This assists you in things like immigration, setting proper compensation based on skills development, and proper recruitment levels. Like what's the average experiential level you would need for a senior manager in one or more categories in your company. So again, national occupational standards. So a bit of a framework that we can build upon training, et cetera. This goes into professional development. So now that we know that, for example, essential skills, success skills are really important in the bioeconomy, and they are, I'll talk about that in a little while. What training can we develop to make sure that we address that? So we have the labor market intelligence, according to national occupational standards. What training do we need to instill so that we can get those skills developed in our people? The next part is talent management. Skills recognition. We're going to be, we're looking right now to create a national certification program for biomanufacturing across Canada. Why? Because again, that national standard, if you're a small and medium-sized enterprise and you're doing biomanufacturing, but that biomanufacturing in your subsector is being done across the country, wouldn't it be nice to just have a stamp and say, I'm certified in GMP, or I'm certified as a biomanufacturer in ag bio, so that you don't have to do all the homework? What does that mean? And who trained you? And what is that organization? And all of this stuff. That's a big problem, because we've got a lot of people who are doing HR that don't know how to do HR, and they don't have the time. So a national standard put to a skills recognition is really important. And that's some of the stuff we're going to be working for. The next part is talent management. How do you recruit? How do you retain? How do you find benefits? How do you find professional development? What's the great thing for a mentorship program? How do I implement diversity and inclusion? This is all part of talent management, and a lot of small and medium-sized enterprises are ill-equipped to deal with it. So this is all the stuff that we put in one big package. You'll notice it's around a circle here under inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, or IDEA. That is now, this was sort of a nice to have for organizations. This is no longer a nice to have. This is a have to have. And the reason being is the bioeconomy right now is not taking advantage of the low-hanging fruit that's out there. And that's in the underrepresented groups, including just females. We're underrepresented in that area, along with immigrants, along with Indigenous communities, all of this stuff. We're not doing a good job of recruiting and retaining this very accessible and strategically advantageous labor market. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a bit. So a little bit by the numbers, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the statistics that came out of our labor market intelligence research to let you know what the snapshot is, what we have right now. But also, we've taken the step where now we're predicting up to the year 2029 of what the labor market is going to look like in Canada. Okay, we've done it by region, we've done it by subsector, and I've got a little bit of a smattering about what this region looks like, what the ag bio subsector looks like compared to the national framework. So let's talk a little bit about that. This report is freely available on the BioTalent Canada website. When we did our labor market study, we did a national report. So we had a sort of a gauge of what's going on in the country, across the country. We did 5 different regions: Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, Prairies, and Western Canada. No, we didn't do Saskatchewan alone. And one of the reasons is we had to have enough numbers from the regions to make sure we were statistically significant so that we could do analysis. So we do the Prairies, but weren't able to do by province. So some of the numbers I have today are going to be talking a little bit about what we encounter here, and also what's the national picture for bioscience. There we go. So we did a census. First time we've done a census for the bioscience and the biotech industry. That's all 4 subsectors. There are 12,000 companies representing 200,000 employees in Canada in the bioscience industry. That works out to an average complement of 16 people per company. That's the average. So what does that mean? 16 people per company. 80%, only 31% across Canada have dedicated HR. So that means 31% companies actually have a person that is dedicated to human resources. So 69%, almost 70% of all companies have nobody on staff that is dedicated to human resources. So that means you've got an accountant doing human resources. Worse, you've got a scientist doing HR. So these are companies, these are people that have not been trained in this, and they probably don't like it at all. It's probably why we're bad at it in a lot of ways, okay? But it's unfortunate because they still have to do it. And now in a tight labor market, they have to get good at it. So you'll see in prairies right now, we have 700 companies here representing 9,800 people. In agribio, 3,200 that we have right here. And SMEs, it's interesting. There's less SMEs out in the prairies than there is across Canada, the proportion, 74%. 80% are SMEs. SMEs are less than 50 people. We use that as the moniker. Some people used to say, well, an SME, that should be less than 200 people. The reason why we use 50 people as sort of that cutoff is that's usually the time when you have to hire an HR manager, once you hit 50, right? So it shows that sort of the difference between small and medium size, or small and larger size. So dedicated HR, to only 26% of your companies out here has dedicated human resources, dedicated to human resource management. And agribio versus all bioscience, not surprisingly, 21% of all companies across Canada are dedicated to agribio, but here in the prairies, 37%, which makes sense because obviously here's where agbio is the flavor. Diversity and inclusion opportunities, our numbers are really bad, and they're really worse than almost every other industry out there, which is very interesting. It's a bit reflective of the fact that, again, we have a whole bunch of people doing HR that never wanted to do HR, never trained to do HR. And are sort of forced into doing it. So female employees across Canada, prairies are actually doing better than the rest of the country. Within the biosciences, 60% of grads in science programs, in bioscience programs, are women, 60% across the country. But only 1 in 3 across the country are employed in companies. Only 1 out of every 3 employees are female. Why is that? There's about 32% of the industry in science that exit the industry that they've trained in, whether it's life sciences or ag. So we do have a lot of these, and the predominant of those are females. Why? Life of a startup, not that great for work-life balance, lack of mentorship, lack of career path within these companies, et cetera. A lot of these companies are unfortunately run by guys who look like me, middle-aged white guys. And unfortunately, there's a lot of times inclusion and diversity is not the norm, and it's the exception and not the rule. So they don't feel welcome. Newcomers, a little less in the prairies than Canada, not much, 12% across Canada are newcomers, employees are newcomers. And the prairies, it's 11%. Again, we got to get better at that. At a country that has immigration as its core value and a core principle in terms of reducing or increasing its labor force, we've got to get better in terms of that. Indigenous Canadians, prairies are doing better. That's significant. We less than 1% across Canada. With Indigenous communities. That's largely because the elephant in the room is the life sciences. And unfortunately, when you're talking about things like genomics and everything else, very difficult both culturally to have a underrepresented group or a culture like Indigenous Canadians feel welcome in a science that has been politically turned against them in many times in terms of genomics, et cetera. I think you understand what I'm talking about. So there's a cultural divide there as well. That agribio, I think, is emerging as a real leader in that, where there are more people employed in those companies, more Indigenous Canadians employed in the prairies and in agbio than in all the others, than in the other subsectors. And then finally, it's very similar to Canada and prairies. It's so ironic that with 70% of the bioscience industry and life sciences in an industry that is there to cure the sick and the infirm, that we employ so little number of Canadians with disabilities in these companies. That is both a cultural divide and a perception problem that we have within the SMEs. We have a lot of CEOs that feel that there's going to be a very difficult to adapt the culture to Canadians with disabilities. The other thing about this is this number may also be low, and I suspect it is because there are a lot of Canadians with disabilities that have invisible disabilities and that do not self-identify for worry that it might be held against them. This is a big area of growth. Everybody's talking about the students and trying to get more students. They are not going to make up the labor market deficit. You're not going to get enough of them. So even if you got every student you wanted that you could out of a program with the growth, you're still going to be competing for all of those students, and they're never going to make up the number of people in positions in here. This is the biggest solution, is getting better at this. Okay, in terms of diversity and inclusion. So the future, by 2029, in all subsectors, there are going to be 65,000 unfilled jobs in the bioscience industry across Canada, 65,000. Here, 3,400. That's what we're predicting. 3,400 jobs that right now, in terms of the supply chain, that students, everything else that we have, that will not be able to be filled. Unfilled biomanufacturing posts across all subsectors, 16,000. By the way, folks, that number was done before the federal government decided to bring biomanufacturing of vaccines back to Canada, which means you've got to add another 6,000 to 8,000 or 4,000 to 6,000 jobs for all those factories that are in the larger urban centers. And that makes it even worse. And what you're going to have now is in biomanufacturing is you're going to have bioindustrial biomanufacturers that are going to be competing for talent with ag. Okay, it's a big issue. Okay, and one of the issues that we're going to have with biomanufacturing is that everybody's asking in some of the biomanufacturing positions, like entry-level bioprocessors, our national occupational standards show there's no need for that person to have an undergraduate degree. I mean, really, the only difference between manufacturing and biomanufacturing is GMP, good manufacturing practices. That's really the only difference. You don't have to have a bachelor's degree in science in order to do some of those tasks. However, we have employers that employ often an academic bias. I've got a degree and everybody in the company has a degree, so they should have a degree as well. Well, we're not going to be able to be that choosy anymore. Or we can be that choosy and that post will stay vacant because you're not going to find somebody who can fill it. So you're going to have to get a little bit more strategic. What is this person doing as opposed to what is the piece of paper that they have? Okay, that's going to be a lot more practical, and it's going to have to be. Before SMEs in bioscience had the luxury of 5 people for every job. That's gone. That's no longer here. The Great Resignation, whatever you want to call it, it's taking care of that. So we no longer have that luxury to look for the absolute unicorn person we want for that position at this point, unless you've really upped your game from an HR perspective. Then you may be hopefully be a little bit more choosy. So new employees in agrobio in terms of the sector's growing. We're looking at 2,100 more employees in agrobio itself, and then total sector employment 11,400, which is what we are predicting for the prairies. That's across all subsectors, not just ag bio. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this. These are our programs. One of the things that we have been instituted is to assist small and medium-sized enterprises with their hiring through wage subsidies. Before it was the sector, the biggest pain point was raising capital. Now, as we all know, it's talent. However, the wage subsidies offer some very big advantages in terms of access to some programs and abilities so that you can up your game in training, that hopefully some of those wage subsidies can go on in instituting some better policies, some better recruitment, some better training, some better professional development for these people. So I'm going to go through some of the programs that we have currently at BioTalent Canada that Saskatchewan companies are taking active advantage of, much better, more now than ever before, but that could be very, very useful for your companies or companies of your peers. First one is our biggest program we've ever done. It's called the Student Work Placement Program. It's essentially a co-op wage subsidy. We work with all of the career education centers and co-op centers of all colleges and universities across the country. We just in August, we just passed the milestone of placing our 10,000th student into a placement across Canada. That number is pretty significant. We can give you up to from $5,000 to $7,000 for an 8-week co-op, 16-week, co-op placement of a college or university student. Yes, master's degrees and PhDs qualify for this as well. The reason why it's different to 5,000, 7,000, 5,000 is for a regular placement. If you hire a person who is a representative from an underrepresented groups, one of the 4 that I talked to you about, including women, newcomers, Indigenous Canadians, or Canadians with disabilities, you can get $7,000 for the placement, which is great. We're hoping that more systemic change will come, but for right now, we don't mind incentivizing on a short term, at least to enhance the diversity. And the good news is we've actually done that. About 70% of our placements are now within that underrepresented groups, which is pretty good, because so we're hoping that, and a lot of those placements become permanent upon graduation. They hire the student back because they've obviously inculcated the company culture and some of those skills that they're required in them. It's our most successful program for sure. Right now, I think we're putting out $35 million in wage subsidies just through this program alone this year. And it's up for renewal in a couple of years, but we were asked to up our game during the pandemic because of the need. So in Saskatchewan, we had 70 placements so far, 2022, 2023, which is pretty good. And we're working with actively 7 educational institutions here in Saskatchewan for that. So this is starting to get some good uptake. This is way better. About 3 years ago, that number was about 5 placements. So it's starting to really take hold here, and that's pretty significant. Next one is our skilled newcomer internship programs. This is not for students. This is actually for newcomers who are here. And it can be for any job within the bioeconomy. So this could be for a marketing position. It doesn't have to be just a science or a researcher. And we can give up to 75% of the first 6 months salary, up to $20,000 for right now it's 165 newcomers. We're having a tough time getting this money out the door, actually, surprisingly. All of our other wage subsidies are quite popular. This one is a little reticent, which is, I think, again, shows who we're selling it to. A lot of times, small and medium-sized enterprises that are worried about the cultural fit and whether they're able to have a place for a welcoming spot for newcomers. Yeah.
Do you have any requirements around which kind of visa they have?
No, what we have is they will have to have been here for 3 years, I believe. So, yeah. And one of our issues too, even with the student work placement program, it's not open to foreign or international students, which is another big issue, right? Because that's a huge component of some of the colleges and universities in Canada now too. So that one there that's one of the barriers to this, and we're trying to talk to the federal government about that, but unfortunately it occurs, yes.
Here for 3 years. By 3 years, they already left if they didn't find a job. Also, do you really call somebody with 3 years of being here in Utah?
And you can and I need you to come because you're echoing exactly what I'm telling the federal government. Look, we have programs for youth, right? Federal government defines youth as 29 years of age or less. And I asked them, and I said, have you ever know how long it takes to get a doctorate in bioscience? I said, why are we being punished as an industry for an arbitrary age just because we're the most educated vertical out there? And it's the same thing. They paint everybody with the same brush. So their definition of a newcomer is that, so therefore they jam these programs into that criteria, right? It's unfortunate. And I think it's one of the reasons why the numbers are low on this program. Come on. Can you advance that slide for me, please? My clicker doesn't seem to be working anymore. Oops. No. That's it. This one is a youth program called the Career Starter Wage Subsidy. It's for barriered or underemployed youth. These are youths who haven't had a full-time job for about 4 months. It's good. It's right now full for 2022-23. Why am I telling you this? Because we're getting a whole nother bunch of positions for next year. So if you have some hiring plans beginning in January, we will have wage subsidies open to you at this point. It's a 50% subsidy up to $20,000. And there are times, this is an interesting thing. I wanted to put this because, Karen, this will be interesting to you. This change in this program came from a meeting I had here in Saskatchewan about 4 years ago, where they were talking about some of the wage subsidies, and they're saying one of their issues is they had to do relocation allowances to relocate some of the new employees to where they were working. And they said, none of your programs allow for relocation allowances. Well, that's how this thing works as a positive feedback loop. I took that, I went back to the federal government and I said, you are unfairly compromising some ag bio, especially out in the prairies and in some of the places where you want your program to be more popular, because you're not allowing them to spend any of this on relocation. And they changed the program. So now this program has relocation allowances, thanks to the meetings I had with all of you here several years ago. It doesn't always work that way. I don't think they're going to do it on the 3-year thing for the newcomer, but at the same time, sometimes they do listen, and which is gratifying. So we've had 3 placements here in Saskatchewan for this year for this program. It's a very popular program, as you can see. It's gone out the door, and we've already filled up our placements for this year. Can you advance the slides again, please? Sure, of course. They're probably having a tough time because I talk so fast too. This is a really cool little story that I wanted to tell you, because every once in a while, we're in human resources and we kind of forget that it's human. We're just dealing with labor market numbers and all this stuff. This lady here, her name is Dina Zacks, and she lives out in Vancouver. She suffers from Rett syndrome. For those of you who don't know that, that is a neurological disorder. She's 42 years old, and that makes her the longest living Rett syndrome patient apparently in the world. We know it's in Canada, but we've heard it's in the world. She cannot speak, and it took her until she was 5 years old for her mother to understand that blinking meant yes, and putting her eyes to the side meant no. That was the only way she was able to speak. They had gotten funding about 7 years ago for a special device that was going to allow and have her with certain tics and certain neurological movements to be able to communicate more than just saying yes or no. But they had no money for a technician to run the machine. So the machine, even though they had it, they never were able to use it. So it stayed in the dust. Through the student work placement program, they had somebody who specialized in that program at UBC. They came in, they understood the machine, started using it, and for the first time in her life, she was able to communicate to her parents in full sentences. It's quite life-changing. That's really interesting. It's just one of the stories that we get from some of these kids. So some things that we have to remember is that we're with some of these placements and some of these programs, you're launching the careers of some really intelligent people, but you're changing the lives of some other people, your stakeholders as well. It's just something, a little bit of a human interest thing that I wanted to share with you. It's a really cool aspect of some of our programs. Whoop, there we go. Oh, now we're doing it together, are we? Yeah. Sorry, I didn't know you were doing it for me. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the talent management things that we have at our disposal. Like I said, NOS stands for National Occupational Standards. Those are freely available on our website, biotalent.ca, and you can come there, download them. You can use them to make job descriptions, plan compensation, etc. We have a national job board called the Petri Dish, which allows you to recruit across Canada. And any given day, there's about 250, 300 jobs on there from producers across Canada. They're from all 4 subsectors. They're not only for research jobs. We have jobs up there for finance, marketing, sales, all sorts of different things. We have a national compensation guide that gives you a benchmark to 34 different job profiles, including things like everything from an assistant. We even have an SME CEO job profile. These are all based on our national occupational standards. And we have a bioskills recognition program. This was specifically set up for immigrants, where we have people from the industry that can go through a set of skills and a resume of an immigrant, and it can label saying those are the skills requisite for a certain job, say in biomanufacturing or bioprocessing, and they achieve the label of bio-ready for that job. The reason why we give them that is because a lot of newcomers face the really big hurdle of Canadian-based industry experience. So this way, at least it's recognized by a Canadian-based industry expert that they have the requisite skills for the profile. So it can get over that hurdle. It can also help you weed out, because we have a lot of newcomers that apply for jobs on our Petri Dish. And if they have that bio-ready label, you know that it's been verified by a Canadian industry expert in terms of the set of skills that they have. It's not working again. So one more time. Okay, this is something we just launched this year. We're trying to up the game for SMEs in terms of inclusion and diversity. So we've launched the Ideal Bioscience Employer Designation. Ideal stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, Accessibility, Leadership. So it's ideal. This is free. Any small and medium-sized enterprise, less than 50, there's 2 divisions, less than 50 employees and over 50 employees can apply for this. And they can put it on their recruitment forms that I'm also an Ideal Bioscience Employer. It allows you to up your game for inclusion and diversity. Things like taking on policies that we have samples of that you can get for free of charge, how to make your staff meetings and your recruitment practices more diverse and more inclusive, all of these things. Again, all of this, why? Because we want SMEs to be able to attract those underrepresented groups in a way that they haven't been able to do before. So this is something we just launched this year. We have online training courses. Believe it or not, the biggest skills deficits in the bioeconomy are not technical skills. They're actually essential skills. Skills like presentation skills, skills like team management skills, running a meeting, reading comprehension. You cannot, which is so important with things like SOPs, standard operating procedures, things like document use. We're still telling people, like, if you're talking about a safety protocol within the lab, don't circulate it by text, right? It actually has to go through a company memo. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's actually problems that a lot of SMEs have. So we've created these courses in partnership with not only employers, but also academics. So these are skills that the academia is not teaching, but that the employers stated are absolutely pivotal. So it's intro to GMP, intro to GLP, intro to GCP, intro to quality assurance and quality control purposes, numeracy, just like converting micrograms to picograms and stuff like that, just things that a lot of these kids just aren't getting out of school. And they're very useful. They're also free of charge if you take one of our wage subsidies. So you get 9 online. These were designed to be online, even pre-pandemic. Who knew it was going to be on vogue? They're bilingual. They're available in English and French, which is what I mean by that. And again, they were designed by the employers. So I can guarantee they're going to be relevant for a lot of the people that you recruit. We've even launched a new podcast called The Science of Talent, which we've done for the last, from a lot of people who wanted to hear about this. And it's myself, I'm your host. And I get to interview a whole bunch of companies across the country that are doing really interesting and creative things to attract and retain talent. Employer challenges. This is the end of the formal part of my talk. This is where we get to chat, and I'd love to hear from all of you and what we're talking about. What are yours? I put these down here because this is some of the ones that we hear from SMEs. Total compensation. Notice I didn't say compensation, total compensation. Are we communicating properly to our employees what they actually are earning, including their vacation, pension, benefits, commissions or incentives, everything that we're talking about? Are you ready to have that conversation with your employees so that you can position yourself competitively if another offer comes in? A lot of SMEs don't, and they forget that a lot of these other things, depending on the demographic you're talking about, benefits and pensions may not be that much for when you're 22 years old and you think you're going to live forever. But if you're recruiting somebody at 45 or 50, where those things are a consideration, that can make a big difference in terms of either retaining or recruiting the right person. Are you ready to have that discussion? Because it's a discussion that you're gonna have to deepen because there's more people that are coming up and there's more competition out there. And you have to have a complete comprehensive discussion on this. Benefits and pensions, they are not created equal. And it's a good idea to benchmark what your company is doing relative to your peers and competitors. Do you have a matching program? You probably don't have a defined benefit program anymore because nobody does, unless you're a teacher or working for the federal or provincial government. But defined benefit pensions are going the way of the dodo. But benefits plans are very, very big difference with people with special needs and again, an aging workforce. This becomes more and more important for you to get the expertise so that you can position your benefits program as just that, a benefit, right, for the employee. Diversity and inclusion tactics and policies. We're now getting a younger workforce that's hitting the bricks, where things like sustainable development, your carbon footprint, good corporate social responsibility, charitable works, volunteer time, inclusion and diversity policies, all of these things are becoming more and more important in terms of how they're, that's my phone, I'm sorry, thought I turned it off. My kid says that sounds like me. There we go. Where was I? Diversity and inclusion tactics and policies. These are all things that are becoming more and more important and by which we are being judged like candidates. By the way, this stuff is cheap. Like being creative on the stuff like diversity, inclusion tactics and policies and corporate social responsibility, espousing some charities that you can get some group giving campaigns or some volunteer things, employee recognition programs that we were talking about earlier. These things don't cost the kind of money that it's going to cost for you to have only one conversation with somebody who's about to leave your company. And that conversation is, they're going to pay me $10,000 more. That's an expensive retention mechanism, because if that's all you're going to have to discuss to retain that employee, costs you $10,000. But if you change the discussion because you become creative with your culture and with your HR practices, you can deepen that discussion on a level that is going to be more important to the demographic you're trying to attract. Specifically, the ones that are most available: immigrants, underrepresented groups, millennials, young people, students who want way more than just a discussion about total compensation these days. Trust me. in terms of the engagement they've got, they're deepening those conversations. They want to see if you're a company worthy of working for. And that's not anymore defined solely by what you pay them. The culture, employee engagement. Are you doing an employee survey? Are you listening to them? And then are you bringing back the results and showing how you're going to change some of your tactics or to respond to their needs? Any company that's over 10 employees, it's difficult under 10 because obviously you want it to be anonymous. But if you're doing anything over 10, employee engagement surveys and services out there are readily available. They're not that expensive. Sends a great message to your staff that you want to hear from them, and it's great from inclusion perspective. And it's a great barometer to give you the roadmap as to where you need to improve your offerings and to make sure you stay competitive. Highly, highly recommend it. The only way you can get that reward that we're talking about, the great place to work, and one of the top things is to score over 90% in their independently conducted employee engagement survey. So it's very, very important. And it's really looked at very favorably by the team. Hybrid work environment. How many people are having a tough time getting people to come back to the office? I know I am. It's like pulling teeth. And it's really difficult. How do we instill FOMO, fear of missing out? How do we do it where we don't in a tough work environment? I mean, I've never feeling, I feel like Oliver Twist all the time when I'm talking to my staff, please, can we have some more time in the office, please? All the time. It's just, and how do you do that? Because it's important. We know a workplace is important because it breeds culture, it breeds creativity, right? Spontaneity. All of these things that make a company more than the sum of its parts. But it's very difficult. How are you doing that? Are you listening to the team? Can you find a happy balance and take a little look-see at your workflows? Because hybrid work environment, it's not going away. It ain't going away at all. And it's going to be one of the criteria that the employees of today and tomorrow are going to be looking at. What is your hybrid work policy? How progressive is it? Do you really walk the talk of work-life balance? It's a big deal. Training and professional development. This is big. This is big. One of the biggest things that the young people are saying, again, it's not only total compensation. They want to be developed. They want to see a career ladder and they want to see what kind of training you are offering for them to be able to get onto it. And a lot of them are willing to sacrifice some of the other elements of the culture of good HR practices just in order to get access to good training. And some of that isn't, you're lucky you can hook into organizations like AgWest Bio that can provide this kind of training. And again, when you're in a small business, as I know, and as you know, the last thing that defines you is your job title, right? If you're CEO of an SME, that means you're answering the phone one day, you're doing sales the second day, you're doing the accounting on the Wednesday, right? And we're pitching to investors on Thursday and Friday, and possibly hiring someone on a Friday afternoon. So this kind of professional development is very valuable in exposing new employees to other aspects of the organization and of what you do as a business. So I'd like to hear from you now. That's the end of my little talk here. I hope it was worthwhile, but I'd like to hear from any questions that you have, or I'd like to hear what challenges you're facing to see if and I might be able to bring some perspectives of what's going across the country, or even with some of the other companies I've talked with.
Thank you, Rob. We do have some questions as part of the registration today. We asked people to submit some questions, and I do appreciate you've provided a wealth of knowledge and information. So to start off with some of the questions that were shared with us, how can we make working in the agri-food sector appealing when fewer and fewer people come from the agriculture backgrounds?
I don't think I've seen any sector that is as bad at PR as the biotech sector. Like, we really suck at it. We have a tough time telling people that vaccines are good. It's a tough sell, and we're just bad at that. I think what we did, I put that human interest story of the Zacks into a couple of my presentations, because as human beings, there's something that unites us. For thousands of years, we've told stories. And it unites, whether you're a PhD or somebody who's completely not even in the sector, that story will resonate because it's of a human interest. I think we need to tell more of your success stories. We would like to know, we complicate things too much. As science, we think it's all about the process. And that's one of the reasons why scientists are such poor communicators. What thrills them is the process. It's not necessarily the intuitive end result. That's why they sometimes have a tough time getting investors. And we need to dumb down our stories so that we can get people excited about where they're working, right? If you start talking to people about their values, saying, you're going to work for a company that's going to sustainably feed thousands of more people with the same amount of energy that's going into the food source. That makes a little bit more sense, right? Sustainably and everything else, and you're using language that they understand, as opposed to talking about enzyme ligases and everything else like that, where they just turn right off. And the thing that's going to be very interesting here is, I didn't share those numbers with you, but the second largest components of professionals that are lacking in the bioeconomy are the industry agnostic skills. They're the salespeople, the marketers, the human resource, the accountants. Those people don't have to be STEM, right? And they can come from any background, but there's not too many marketers I know that are taking either a Marcom course or something in university that are told, gee, you should go work in the biotech sector. We pay more than most industry verticals for those jobs, 20 to 25%. Does anybody know that? No. And that is playing the compensation card. So we're going to have to get a little bit better at this. We're going to have to, and we have to stop preaching to ourselves. We know it's a great industry. We don't need to market the industry to people who are already working in it. We need to market it to other verticals. I mean, we have a tourism sector that was devastated by the pandemic. We have an aviation sector that is just recovering. There's a lot of people put out of work. Did we market the biotech sector as a viable alternative for these professionals? Not very well, right? And we need to change the dialogue where we can dumb it down and speak to people in a way that they can understand. But I think we can all do that. And we need to tell our stories. So if you're doing something that's really cool of a human interest story, share it with me, share it with Karen and her team at AgWest Bio so we can get the word out on social media channels and everything else. We got to get better at promoting our own industry, especially for those people who aren't already in it.
Thank you, Rob. I'm conscious of time and appreciating that there may be some questions that are coming in reflective of the information that they heard. Amy, are we seeing any questions online? Okay, well, I do want to turn it over. I do see a hand in the room here. So we'll turn it over to questions in the room.
Thank you, Rob. Susan from MyTex. Thank you for showing some data, a great presentation. Do you have any idea how many qualified people, mostly I would say mothers, are not working because of lack of quality childcare? Do you have any idea of that number in Saskatchewan and in Canada? Like, how do you mobilize that segment of the population, which is well qualified, but we don't have the programs? And the second part of that same question is, do you see any programs starting for reintegrating mothers in the workforce after a few years, maybe they were away? How do you help them? Are there part-time jobs, benefits, mentoring programs, things like that, even writing a resume? Or so how do you see that changing in terms of equity and diversity?
The higher you will go up in the hierarchy, whether it's a small or medium-sized enterprise or even some of the larger multinational pharmaceutical companies, the higher you go up the chain of the hierarchy, the lower the proportion of women. And it's universal. I don't have numbers for you in terms of the number of new mothers or the number of women who are not offered childcare, but with the small and medium-sized enterprise proportion, you can see that 80% of them are less than 50 employees. So the point is a lot. The work-life balance, both in going into in the life of a startup, which is where all of these are, combined with the glass ceiling, combined with the lack of mentorship, is the reason why we have a whole bunch of very smart females that get out of the university and then are shocked that they can't have their cake and eat it too, meaning they can't have a good work-life balance that is conducive to proper family, and they're working for companies that are completely ill-equipped because of the size of the company. And even in the larger companies, they're working with hierarchies and C-suites that are usually not very empathetic because they can't relate, literally. So I think the problem is rampant. It's why we have, I think it's an even bigger problem than the lack of mentorship. Is just that these companies that we have, both because of the lack of, I will say sensitivity, I won't say empathy, but I'm sure the CEOs of most of the SMEs are quite empathetic, but they don't understand. They can't relate either personally or from an expertise on how to solve the problem. And again, a lot of the work is done in a lab, so it's not really conducive to work. It's not really conducive to a hybrid work environment a lot of the time, right? So I wish I had more details for you. We did do a study several years ago. There are more companies out. Sorry, there are more associations that are being created, like what's it called, SWIST, the Science Women in. It was Society of Women in Science and Technology. That are Women in Bio. Also has a couple of chapters, Montreal and Toronto. They're trying to expand it to the other areas. They're trying to address this this problem in a lot bigger and more substantial way. I guess the good news is that we do have the substrate, that we have 60% of people in science as women. So we have the desire to go into it, but the vast majority of the women, if they are working in the industry, often take either academic or NGO positions or government positions because it's more conducive to work-life balance, which is why there's that lack of diversity within the small and medium-sized enterprises. How's it going to change? I talked to a bunch of students in biomedical engineering in Banff, and the two startup people didn't like me very much because they didn't like what I said. And what I said to them, I said, this tight labor market is going to change the way we deal with human resource management. Why? Because the companies are either going to adapt or they're going to die. And it's going to be the women that will have, you want me? I'm a qualified individual. This is what I want. This is what your company has to offer, or you won't get me. That's really the only thing. It's going to be a question of pain and everything else. And they're going to, I think the young students of today with their value systems, and the newcomers as the most available labor source are going to change the game. And it's going to be where companies are either going to have to adapt to these groups and their needs, or they're simply not going to attain their business objectives. That's going to be it. I mean, the numbers don't lie. 65,000 positions. You're either going to have to get better at HR, or you're going to be at the bottom of the pack. So I'm hoping that that's going to be the case. I'm certainly hoping we're going to be doing some more studies on it to try to delve deeper. Most of our information that we have from females in our study is anecdotal. It's not hard numbers, and we didn't ask the hard questions that you were asking right now. But I think there's going to be a lot of motivation for governments and for businesses to look into them a lot more. I hope that helps. Okay.
Thanks, Rob. I see another question in the room here.
Thank you, Rob. It's Majid Hassas with the Ministry of Agriculture. However, my question has nothing to do with my title. So the question is, especially from the disability group, there is something called disability fear from both employers and also from the people who want to get hired. They don't say that because that's the, for example, common theme between them, because they think if they say that, they won't get hired. So because employee, oh, I don't want somebody with all those different names. I don't want to say that, but I don't want somebody who cannot do the job properly. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. And also perhaps lack of courses for the employers to know how to deal with a person with disability. So all those as well. So do you think, for example, having a course for the employers or for the future employers to how to deal with somebody that has disability, this type of disability, and what it means actually, how scary it can be, so people start developing trust on each other? Is that something possible?
Absolutely. And I like your question, but it's very interesting because somebody was, again, at this talk that I was talking about yesterday, and I'll give you an example that hits her. I was saying, you know, the young people and the labor market that's out there that is being courted so much can change the company's policies And I said, you should be asking, what is your bent on diversity? What is your bent on inclusion to the company? And one of the employers next to me said, you can't expect a company of 12 people to have a diversity and inclusion policy. And I said, why not? I said, well, how am I going to develop it? And I said, have you taken a look? Have you Googled it to see if there's diversity and inclusion policies out there that are freely available? There are, and they're free. They're just, you just download the PDF and put in the Hunt and Peck and put in my company name and all this. It's easy. They're just not doing it. And your point right now, in terms of the professional resources, there's tons of resources out there on how to be sensitive to the neurodiverse, on how to accommodate and equity and accessibility for the problem is employers aren't watching them. They're not. It's not a question of a lack of these resources that are out there. There's tons of them. I mean, you've seen from the government, you work in the government yourself, Ministry of Agriculture. In the federal government, they're funding all sorts of programs that have accessibility and training specifically with those on how to ensure that a newcomer has a pleasant experience on onboarding, training, coupling them with a mentor. All of this stuff is out there. The issue is not that there's not enough resources out there going around. The issue is the biotech employers aren't watching it, and they're not being made to care because it's not of interest to them. It's human nature. They're just not interested. It's not part of what's in their bailiwick. Are there more being generated? Absolutely. We have free training courses there on essential skills, free training courses on the wage subsidies given to 2,000 wage subsidy people right now. These are students who we had to bribe businesses with money to hire them because they didn't want to invest, right? Because they're more expensive to onboard and all of that stuff than somebody who's been in the industry for 2 or 3 years. We give them training that the employers have stated they needed. Only 20% of them ever took the training, and it's free. They didn't even have to do anything. They just have to make the student take it. And this is essential skills. These are all the skills that they're telling us that they're lacking. And why? Because the HR isn't interested in them. It's that lack of engagement. So to your point, yeah, I'm hoping that there's going to be more, and I'm hoping there's going to be more marketing points and everything else. But I think it's only going to be when they realize they're not meeting their business objectives because they can't find people that they're actually going to up their game. And even then, I don't know. I don't know if they will. It'll be interesting to see. But they're either going to have to because there's only a finite amount of people out there. And good for them that they go for the companies that care and the companies that watch the videos and do the training because they should. Those are the companies that deserve them.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you for the question. I am very conscious of time, and I personally find this as a very engaging topic as an HR professional myself. But I will take, if there's one more question in the room. If not, I do have a final question.
Oh, go ahead.
So I actually have a background in education. So it's about 15 to 20% of people that are neurodivergent, just in general pop. 1% you're saying are reporting that. How, other than those diversity and inclusion statements that are so widespread and seen, how do you see best companies moving forward to encourage those people to come forward to have those supports needed?
The more it's been proven in statistics, it's a great question. A lot of unless it is a visible disability, most of them are invisible. So your point is right. And I agree totally that with the gentleman here, where they're saying it is being underreported, there's no question. But I think his solution is just that. As an employer, we have on my company about 10 people who are, 10% of ours that have visible disabilities. We only had about what we thought was 3% that had visible disabilities. The other 7% started admitting that they did. And they started admitting them that did when we started showing the videos on how companies can get better at attenuating their culture and making certain things in their culture more accessible. It makes them feel a lot less fearful about divulging and letting them. So I think that's the first, is to create that safe space of diversity and inclusion. The more that you start talking about how you're showing your hiring practices are open to the neurodiverse, using your example, or open to the visually impaired or whatever else like that, the more you're going to find these people believing what you're talking about, because why would you say it and then not do it in terms of that? But if they never hear you talking about it, if they never hear you talking about making your hiring practices or your onboarding more diverse or inclusive, or mentoring, but using the buddy system to make people feel from different diverse groups or from Canadians with disabilities feel immediately more accepted. You're not going to change it, and they're going to want to stay closeted for sure. So I think that's what you have to do. You have to create that safe space. That's what worked for us. And it shows statistically, they also like it because it's usually a lot of education. So you're creating that safe space in probably the way that's the best, because it's not just you may be very open-minded. It may be your team that's not, or not as inclusive as you would like them to be. And if you show them that this is the way the company is, and you incorporate that into your corporate values and really make it walk the talk, I think it goes a long way to alleviating that fear of self-identification for those people. Hope that answers your question. Good.
Thank you, Rob. And I will pass the mic over to Karen, and if you want your question.
Well, my quick question is, does Saskatchewan have a disadvantage over other provinces? Because we always feel like we're the underdogs. It's flat, it's cold. There's not many of us.
I was saying somebody just here before, I'm going to just use an example. Charlottetown, PEI. Did you know there were 60 biotech companies in Charlottetown, PEI? It's the second biggest industry in PEI next to fishing. Biotech. Are there disadvantages? Sure. I mean, from a labor perspective, there's no question. You have an issue with newcomer retention. There's a lot of people that'll settle here, but a lot of people won't stay. They'll go to other cultural communities or other larger urban centers where they feel that there's a larger cultural community for the family, for the spouse, et cetera. That's an issue here. It's an issue. It's also an issue in Atlantic Canada, for sure. Are there but with every disadvantage, and this is really the key to me of this stuff, is Saskatchewan has to take its disadvantage and shove it into an advantage. You've got to change the dialogue. Is it cold in Saskatchewan? Yeah, okay. It's Canada. I mean, it's only in Vancouver and Victoria that it's not. I mean, like, really, right? In terms of that. But at the same time, the infrastructure that you have and the ecosystem that you developed here for ag bio in particular, second to none in Canada. I don't talk about ag bio in the other provinces at all. They very rarely. It's always the elephant in the room. When I come to Saskatchewan, I rarely talk about health sciences. I'm not saying you don't have it. I know you have life sciences here too. But ag bio dominates the conversation, which is great. That's an advantage. You've got a megaphone that these other provinces don't have, where you can attract people that might be interested in your industry, where they don't feel a home, where they don't want to. I mean, you have no idea when I'm talking to bioindustrial. Oh my God, when I come to the conferences, they are so frustrated because they can't get their share of the mic. It's always the pharmaceutical companies that are taking all of the airtime when you're talking about biotech. Nobody thinks that there's any other subsectors. There's a hell of a lot of ag bio in Ontario. There's a hell of a lot, and in Quebec and in Atlantic Canada. But in Saskatchewan, somehow you've been able to dominate the airwaves with regards to this subsector. I think that's amazing. Like, your provincial government, et cetera, is incredibly supportive of it and understands the value of it. I think that's really important. What does PEI do? Guess what they were able to do? And bio, it's the only province that was able to get the premier to come to the largest biotech company, biotech conference in the world at Bio, to talk to people to invest in PEI. That kind of support is amazing. You have that kind of support. It's just not in life sciences. It's in your own niche industry. And I think you have to take that to your advantage. So Charlottetown comes around, you're saying, who's any other provincial premier come here? No, they've got all 5 levels of government. We can talk about tax breaks and economic development and everything else. You do have some advantages here that I think you can really use. There's no question. I come to Saskatoon and everything. It reminds me a lot geographically of Ottawa, quite frankly. But I always come here, and you guys, like other provinces, are very proud of your heritage, of what you've got here. You've also got a great advantage, wonderful advantage in attracting Indigenous Canadians to your way more than life sciences or bioenergy or anything else. You've got a great, and that is such an underemployed a group of people, but you're already making headway into doing that. So there are federal government and provincial government programs. From even our federal government programs, there is not a skills development or a wage subsidy program that I haven't seen that doesn't have Indigenous concerns. And you've got a leadership role, as far as I'm concerned, that you can use that card, okay, to your advantage. So there are many things within that thing. You have small and medium-sized enterprises, the tight-knit community that is here, the ecosystem that you've built, the provincial support that you have for your specific subsector. These to me are all great advantages that you can use. absolutely to attract people to this location and to this subsector. And I've seen other companies do it on an individual basis, and I've seen them do it on an economic development regional basis and everything else. I mean, it's great. I mean, and you guys know as well, the bioscience is a fantastic industry. They're philanthropic. They pay more than other industries. They vote. I mean, they're all of these things. They're great corporate citizens. They're like that's why most municipalities are killing to get them, right? To try to attract them to them, because they're fantastic corporate citizens. And I think you've got a great cluster here that you can maximize. But we have to get better PR. We have to tell our stories, and we have to put a face on it so that people see that it's not just cold. There's just some really good, really exciting companies and really good people here, and to tell those stories. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Rob. I have to say the time has flown by, and I acknowledge that we're probably right at the 4:30 mark. It's such an important conversation. I really appreciate, the real opportunity for us to tell our stories. And I will say, I personally am thinking, I made many notes, and I'm thinking, how can I, move this forward? How can I continue to capitalize on what BioTalent Canada is making available to all of us as employers, but also think about how my role in diversity, inclusivity and equity, and how I can shift the needle around many conversations, whether it's individuals that are neurodivergent or newcomers coming to Canada and really moving the needle. So thank you, Rob. Thank you so much for traveling to Saskatoon and Saskatchewan. We definitely appreciate this conversation, and I look forward to future opportunities to connect with you when you are in our province, and bring you back to answer more questions today. So thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you.